Registry Matters is an independent production. The opinions and ideas here are that of the hosts and do not reflect the opinions of any other organization. If you have a problem with these thoughts, FYP.
Recording live from FYP Studios, East and West, transmitting across the internet. This is episode 75. 75, Larry. We are almost as old as you of Registry Matters.
Well, that's going to take some doing to get as old as I am.
Well, we are incrementing by the week, so I don't know, what are you, 300 or something?
Well, if I served in the Lincoln administration, and we've gone, this is the third century I've been alive. You can, and I was an adult then, so I'm getting up there.
Because you were interviewing for Lincoln's staff, weren't you?
Yes, I served in the War Department under Secretary Stanton.
Do you know what today is as far as being like a special, not quite holiday?
What is today?
Today is May the 4th, so May the 4th be with you. Do you get it?
I get it.
Do you really? I'm
That's
shocked
so
if you do.
That's so funny. I forgot to laugh.
Oh, come on, man. You've now just hurt many people's feelings if you don't go along with that whole little shindig.
That's what we used to say in the old days. That was so funny. I forgot to laugh. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I do remember that one. That sounds like some schoolyard humor. We got a couple voicemail messages to listen to, and one of them is really long, and this individual cannot shorten it. And anyway, but I'll play that one second. The first one is from Mike, and Mike said that he was just waking up when he was recording this, so it might be a little incoherent.
Hey guys, this is a long-time listener, Mike, down in Florida. And I just wanted to call and ask a question. I've sent my case file into Gil Schaffnet here in the state of Florida, and I'm waiting to hear from him on a consultation. My question is, where should I be focusing my energy to prepare for this, to see if I can get some kind of post-conviction relief? What kind of questions should I be asking? What should I be looking for him to, ask of me? Any kind of advice you could help me would be great. One thing I have working in my favor is the victim in this case is willing to come to court, willing to testify on my behalf. I don't know if that would help in the state of Florida, but if you guys have any insight on that, I would love to hear what you think about it. And I would like to say a big old FYP to House Bill 987 in Florida. I'm glad that didn't pass. That was a nightmare, and I'm glad we dodged that bullet. As always, I appreciate you guys. The podcast is great. I've never missed one, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
And that's one of our supporters as well. Thank you, Mike. And so that's two things going on there with that question.
Oh, yeah?
Well, one thing was a question, and then the other part was about the House bill.
So in terms of Mr. Schaffet, who is one of our supporters at NARSL, and we think well of, it's hard to answer the question about what he should focus on when you don't know what his post-conviction issues are. If you just simply box up if anybody actually does boxes anymore, but if you just simply box up documents and send them to an attorney, it's probably not the most productive way to get help, because I tell people to write your bullets out of what you think your claims are, not all the supporting evidence, but what you believe your claims are. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, I mean, what issues do you have? An issue is, before I entered my plea, they deprived me of sleep for 7 days straight, and they turned on a fire hose intermittently during that time. And just to stop that from happening to me, I pled guilty. That's your issue. Now we'll unpack the evidence later, but Gil's going to need to know what his issues are that he's sending him. I'm assuming he's wanting a consultation. If you just simply say, I don't like being convicted, not very many people do. So I don't know if the questioner's conviction was derived from a plea, then that severely narrows what can be done post conviction. I don't know if it was obtained by a jury verdict. That would give additional options, assuming that time limits have not expired for some of those things are very time sensitive in terms of direct appeal and issues. Constitutional violations, generally you have more of a window of time, because if the statute is constitutionally defective, then your conviction is invalid on its face because there's no basis for the person. It sounds like when he says the victim is willing to come forth and testify, what I'm guessing is that we've got someone who's done a plea and the person has decided that they want to recant.
Well, I can fill in this is something that happened in the 90s. He's been on the registry for like forever before any of the enhanced restrictions came in place, and he's on lifetime registry in Florida. I'm pretty sure his objective is to get off the registry in Florida.
Okay, so he's not actually attacking his conviction, right? Because it sounds like the way if you listen to the message, it sounds like he said his victim's willing to come forward and testify,
like on his behalf as a character witness. Because I think it was a Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, but he also used the words post conviction. If he's challenging the registry, that's not a post conviction process.
Okay,
that's a constitutional attack. If he's challenging the registry, the only time he would be going, if Florida were to have a removal mechanism that the victim gets to participate in, that would make sense. But as far as I know, and I don't have all the answers in terms of how you get off registries and which ones you can and can't potentially get off of, but my recollection was that there's not a removal process in Florida.
Right.
If there's not a removal process, then he used the term post conviction. So if we're trying to undo our conviction here, then he has to have some basis to proceed, and there has to be the way he wants to proceed there has to be a vehicle for him to proceed in. And if he's served out the totality of his sentence, then he's not in custody for habeas purposes. So that's a vehicle that's closed to him. If he's going to try to do an appeal of some type, those are probably foreclosed. So the funnel is pretty narrow at this stage if we're talking about a conviction that old in terms of anything post-conviction remedy he could have that I can think of. So it would probably, I know people get disappointed when I say this, but I don't have enough information from the question to know exactly where he's trying to go, where he's trying to get with Gil. But just leaving a box with your file is not going to be enough if you don't have succinct issues of what you want to do. And the attorney can build the evidentiary record later if it's something where your victim wants to recount. That's not going to help you very much because the victim recanted testimony and is not worth much standing by itself. Because as I've said on previous podcasts, and he's listened to everyone, so I'm sure he's heard this, but for those who haven't listened to everyone, a recantation is not of any value in and of itself, because at the point a person recants what they've previously sworn to, at that point they become de facto a liar, because the two stories they've told cannot be true. So at that point, if you're the prosecutor, you just have to say, now let me make sure I prepare the witness. You're saying now that this didn't happen, and you said in 1997 under oath that this did happen. So you're telling two different stories. So you're admitting that you are a liar, right? Yes. Then the next question is, why should we believe you today? You're an admitted liar.
Right.
and you, so with trying to undo a conviction on recanted testimony, that's not going to do it. If you have recanted testimony and other evidence, like there was an evolution of DNA that you can exonerate yourself with that, or someone else comes forward and said, I can guarantee you he didn't do it, I did it. That might help you. But a person sometimes trying to take responsibility for a crime can't, because they actually didn't do it, and they're beyond the statute of limitations. So the prosecutor will look at that with great trepidation if someone comes and says, well, I'd like to take responsibility for that. I did it. Well, how come you didn't come forward when you were within the zone of prosecution? So they want to hold on to the conviction they've got because they're dubious about the confession that's coming in too late to be prosecuted. But it's going to help if we have a little bit more information. So I would welcome another phone call, or either appear on the program if he wants to.
Well, he's already been on, so yeah, we could make that happen again. Maybe he'll come on next week. But all right. And then here's the long voicemail message from somebody in Tennessee.
Good afternoon. This is William from Tennessee, and I've just finished listening to your most recent podcast, and I too was excited about the ruling against the sexual history polygraphs requiring disclosure of past victims, but I have a question about the polygraphs that persons like myself who are under lifetime supervision have to take every 6 months, which is basically a compliance polygraph. And in Tennessee, the state law, Tennessee Code Annotated 39-13-526, states very plainly that any knowing violation of the conditions of community supervision for life can be prosecutable as a Class A misdemeanor, meaning you can get up to 11 months, 29 days in county lockup, and you can get a maximum fine of $2,500. Now, what's the difference in the self-incrimination of the sexual history polygraph and them asking you questions that if you admit to it, that they could send you to jail for a misdemeanor crime? Either way, it's still a Fifth Amendment implication. And I was wondering, is there any way that these court rulings against the sexual history polygraph, the reasoning could be applied in challenging the maintenance polygraph, since they also seek self-incriminating testimony? And thank you for what you do, and for all you people who support the registry and all these monstrous laws. You're such friendly young people. But thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you on both counts from both callers for saying the FYP. Appreciate that very much. It's getting out and it's getting around. People are FYPing us.
So that is actually not as long as I expected. That was a good question, and I just now this is the first I've heard it. We have in this area of polygraphs, we have the body of case law is developing, so we don't know where it's going to take us. What we do know is that the courts are recognizing that there are serious issues with hooking people up to a device and getting them to make disclosures that can incarcerate them. That's what we do know. We don't know in a maintenance polygraph for a CSL person that I'm not familiar enough with know exactly what they're asking on the maintenance polygraph. If you want a regular probation in our state under sex offender supervision, I know exactly what they'd be asking you. Well, not exactly, but fairly certainly what they'd be asking you here. They would be asking you about putting yourself in the proximity of minors, because you would have typical conditions that you not be associating with anyone under the age of 18. They would be asking you, have you potentially viewed any erotic stimuli? The types of things they would be asking you, have you violated curfew? All of those things could send you away. Under CSL, if it has the potential to send you away, my lay opinion would be that this would form the basis for a very credible claim. The body of case law that's developing would make a very credible claim. So I would need to read 39-13-526 a little more carefully, and then I'd have to know a little bit more about how CSL works in Tennessee and what type of what the outcome is for those who violate it. But at first blush, I think that Will is onto something, like he typically is, that this is an opportunity to expand the reach of the rulings. But someone's got to come forward, got to have a little bank, and make a challenge, assert a challenge, and see where it goes in the courts. And in my opinion, the federal courts are the best place to be with this type of stuff. Although I think we got a recent decision that was favorable out of the Supreme Court in Massachusetts, at the state Supreme Court, about the GPS monitoring. It was deemed to be clearly a search and a seizure. So I think that Tennessee courts I would probably be trying to avoid, and I'd be trying to get into federal court on this particular claim.
Excellent. I constantly struggle with the polygraph thing, because it is such bogus junk. And unless you have some sort of disclosure with the person giving the polygraph that all of the information is there just literally to make sure that you're being compliant and all that stuff. But it just it seems that they're trying so very hard to get you to admit to doing some sort of probation violation, just anything of that sort, that you incidentally ran into somebody down the toy aisle at Walmart. It's a fishing expedition, as we've said a bajillion times.
It is. And the thing is, it works. I mean, the polygraph
Yes.
device itself may not work, but
Right.
the psychological impact does. People confess at the end of the exam when they're told they're showing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I said we could hook some wires and electrodes up to a potato, and if you believe that it was going to like show deception, well then you would admit your guilt to the potato. Like seriously, so don't believe in the potato, people.
Well, but like I say, it is a successful tool, whether or not it's based on sound science, which I've come around to having my dubiosity based on what the experts have told me that actually administer the test. But in my experience, it does result in an admission when people, well, I don't want to be considered a liar. So they, oh, yes, I did do that.
Right. Well, we're going to do something very different at this point. We are going to do a dynamic reading, or is it dynamic or theatrical reading? And there was a conversation going on over on the Discord server, the Registry Matters Discord server, between a couple people, and I couldn't quite figure out how to like narrow this down into some sort of concise question and answer thing. So here we go. We have 2 parts to this 3-act play. And so Larry, give it a shot.
Registration requirements differ from state to state. These differences include what crimes require registration, length of registration, what sort of classification or tier certain offenses fall under, and many other restrictions on liberties. So let's say a person is convicted and required to register for life in State A. They later move to State B. In State B, that same offense would have required the individual to register for 10 years. However, State B has a catch-all in their statute that says you must register for whichever period is longer. In this instance, the lifetime requirement of State A. This seems to generate a constitutional concern as it appears to violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So there is a rational basis for requiring a new resident in State B to register for life when another resident of State B that committed the same offense on the same day is only required to register for 10 years. State B clearly doesn't see the same offense as egregious as State A, so they treat the person. So why treat the person any different as someone who was convicted in State B? It seems to me that a person should be required to register according to the most similar offense in the state which they currently reside. Unfortunately, this has the potential to lead to a wave of registrants flooding to states that favor their situation. That would be political nightmare for politicians who would undoubtedly scramble to make tougher laws.
I think Larry has mentioned this, and I'm not sure if it's being challenged or not. On the other side, since constitutional claims are federal, they could argue that if you don't have to register for life, the other people with your crime convicted in State A aren't being treated as they are registering for life, i.e., you aren't compared to the state you moved to, but the state you did the crime in. I'm just parsing what the other side may say. I agree with you, since it's a civil registry that is administered and put in place by the receiving state, you should be treated equally with those that live in that state.
Did I say that?
No, you didn't say that. He's just sort of like channeling his inner Larry.
It's similar to what I would have said, though, had I answered that. So I would have said it slightly differently. But now let's be clear. All states don't have that language that says that you have to register for the longer period. And generally, my experience is that states don't have that. I can think of Utah that has that, but I can't think of a long list of states that say, well, if it would only be 10 years here, but since you came from a state where your conviction requires life, it's lifetime here. So I don't think that's a large problem. That's a large problem if it's you, but I don't think that's the norm. And nor should it be. And if you want my opinion, I think that there is the potential for the type of constitutional challenge that the first reader, the first person I read from, I think Frank is headed in the right path. I can't say, since I'm not licensed to practice law, how valid it is, but certainly it's colorful and credible enough to get into court and not be laughed out.
So you're in some sort of state, I mean, like we could just say Florida. Florida has lifetime registration, and you move to some place, I don't know, wherever, that doesn't have lifetime registration, and you committed some offense. The destination state doesn't have it, but you're required to register there for life. And when you compare two people with similar crimes that are now both residing in the state where you are, one of them has lifetime registration, one of them doesn't. And that is a 14th Amendment equal protection clause claim?
It possibly might be. Like I say, since I'm not qualified to say for sure, but
Yeah.
it possibly may be an equal protection because you got two citizens of your state who are in identical circumstances in terms of their requirement to be in this regulatory scheme. One has a 10-year obligation, one has a lifetime obligation. They committed essentially the same crime. So it's credible enough that I think that you at least get in court and don't get laughed out. But we need to find someone who knows what all the equal protection clause applies to say that would actually survive on motion to dismiss and all the things that the state would file.
And someone has to essentially attempt to do the said thing so that they have standing. You can't just file a victimless claim. Is that, or somebody that is not hampered by these claims? Is that correct?
That's correct. We're going to need someone with standing to make this assertion that's living in a state, someone who moved from a lifetime state to Utah, and that offense would still be 10 years had they committed in Utah. We're going to need someone to do that before we'll know the answer. And they're probably going to have to plan to spend a lot of money and do a lot of appellate work, because I would imagine that the state of Utah is going to defend that law with a lot of energy, because they put it on the books for a reason. People that had been moving to Utah were saying, I'm coming here to your state because it's easier.
Right.
And at some point, they accumulated enough names in their document database of people who had moved to Utah that had longer requirements, and they said, we've got to close this floodgate. That's why I tell people, when you move to another state, don't say I came here because your laws are more favorable. For God's sakes, think of something else to say.
And don't ruin it for all the people that have come before you or potentially coming after you. We shoot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, when you check in with your new state, the first thing they ask you at the registry is, why did you move here? Well, if you can't think of any lie to say, then just say, I don't really know. I just love the climate. I don't know, but people say, well, your laws are more lax and more reasonable here. Well, that gets documented. And then the law enforcement apparatus, as I call it, tells their people, their leaders, that we've had X number of people move here in the last year from out of state because our laws are lax. And then they go find a legislator and they say, we need to close this loophole. And that's how the Utah law got passed, to impose the greater requirement.
Right. And that's why we don't, or you don't, and NARSL doesn't publicly announce, well, this is the research that we've done, and people would be far easier if they moved over here. So that's why that information doesn't become public.
That is correct. NARSL takes a lot of heat for that policy, which I have encouraged that policy, and I hope that it survives when I'm no longer a part of NARSL. But we don't want to hurt people. And having a list of desirable states would be very detrimental, because the politicians could not stand such a list being published. I mean, all it would take would be a victims advocates group to say, look at this website. They'd come in with a screenshot of the website, and they'd have the list of the most favorable like states for sex offenders. And what do you think that the legislators in those states would have to do at that point? Do you think they could say, well, we're going to do the right thing morally. We're going to keep it the way it is, and to hell with this victims advocates group? They're not going to do that. Somebody's going to sponsor legislation, and it's going to be difficult to vote against, and it's going to end up making it to the governor's desk, and it's going to become law. So that's why we don't do that, even though we get a lot of criticism. It's like, why don't you people do that? I mean, you claim you're an organization that cares about the offender. Why don't you people tell us where we can live? So.
Good times, as always, good times. So keep your mouth shut. That's the moral of this whole story. We have an article. I have no idea what this publication is, so maybe this could be called out as fake news or something, but it's not that kind of story. But it's from the Northern Light, and the title of it is "Abolish the Sex Offender Registry." It goes over the exact same points we continue to go over. I just personally throw these in there if I find them, because I like to know that there are people that we don't necessarily have very much affiliation with, if any affiliation at all, that is talking our same points of that the registry is ineffective. It destroys, there's so much collateral damage on the other side of it. Pointing out that there are 89,000 minors on the sex offender registry for exploration, or, other kind of like non-coerced, consensual kind of things amongst teens or, other minors. Anyway, that's all I want to say about that.
Well, there's the second paragraph is filled with examples. Note the 15-year-old in Pennsylvania, who was charged with manufacturing and disseminating child pornography after taking explicit pictures of herself and sharing them. Now, we don't get who she shared them with, but
Right.
but regardless of who she shared them with, she should not be charged with any crime whatsoever. She's a 15-year-old girl.
Yeah.
For God's sakes, what the hell's wrong with you people up there? Now, if she shared them with adults, then there are consequences on the books for adults possessing those photos. But you would charge the 15-year-old with nothing. I mean,
there was that case, like 3 years ago, with all the teens in Colorado in a fairly affluent school, and there were like 100 teens that had some sort of like a locker, a secure place on their phone. Larry, I literally have no idea what happened to that case. It just seemed to
they dropped it.
Disappear.
Yeah,
so why can they drop it there, but like this shit still goes on in other places on a one-off basis?
Because of public pressure. That cut across an affluent community that had lots of people who had influence, and they told their elected prosecutor, "We do not want our children to have these records." Right. And the prosecutor listened. That was all the difference. But the next part, on a couple of 14-year-old boys in New Jersey, he pulled down their pants and sat on two 12-year-old boys. Now, I don't think 14-year-olds should be pulling down their pants and sitting on 12-year-olds. That's probably not the best thing. But again, have you people forgotten what you did when you were 14?
I know, right?
Yeah, this doesn't merit sex offender criminal prosecution. I mean,
and that's not to say there shouldn't be some kind of punishment, some sort of slap on the wrist, some sort of, there are other directions that we could go, but I mean, I'm assuming some DA said they have broken the law and we have to prosecute them to the fullest extent.
That's why you have to do what we did in the Republic of New Mexico, is you have to take that power away from them, because they will use it if they have it. You have to say, Mr. Attorney General, you have not been able to contain yourself from prosecuting teenagers, so therefore we're going to contain you. And that's what has to be done here. If they have a power, they're going to use it. And I said Republic of New Mexico, trying to be funny because people don't believe we're part of the United States. And still to this,
you're one of the 3 countries of Mexico, aren't you?
So, but this is so sad that this is happening. And that no one seems. I mean, I agree with the writer here. I don't know how widely disseminated this is, but Ben Edwards has hit this article solidly in terms of what's wrong with the registry. I mean, he goes into great detail about why you need to abolish the whole thing. He said that people are sometimes willing to take off the less serious offenders, but no one should be on this thing.
Yeah,
there shouldn't be a registry.
I'm still stuck on these 14-year-old boys and. Then was there must not have been any political pressure to not pursue it, but at the same time, was the DA sitting there like laying in bed at night, like talking to his wife or his husband, her husband, whichever way that works out, saying, "Gosh, I really don't know which way this should go. Should I prosecute? Should I not prosecute?" And it feels like it should be a no-brainer that these are just juvenile antics. Maybe you give them some sort of suspension. Talk to the parents, have some counseling. I gotta think that we could come up with something better, but we've decided to make this the shittiest thing ever.
Well, that's the political pressure that's caused us to have that attitude about being tough. There's no easy to. The easiest decision is to take the power away. We won't be having this discussion if you can't prosecute a 15-year-old for making pictures of themselves, can we? We won't have this discussion anymore.
Yeah. But don't they need to be punished? Don't we need to contain them? The children, that is?
Yes, we do that through counseling, and we do that through in school. We do that through like we handle things throughout the ages. When I went to school, cops running around in a school building with guns, we would never dream such a thing.
I know. I'm just thinking back to my Ute. You probably didn't see that movie, but I remember one school fight where somebody had some kind of cutting device, and then you saw like the teeniest little bit of splatter on like the Coke machines down by the cafeteria. That was the extent of violence in my school, as far as I recall.
Yeah, well, then it goes on in this article about the age of consent laws, and some states don't provide a gap for those in proximity to the same age. So if the age of consent is 18, and the one party is 18 and one is 17, without that protection of the law, yes, we could use discretion and not prosecute that. But it gets prosecuted anyway because, by golly, he oughtn't to have done that. He had sex with a high school girl, and he was not even in high school anymore. So therefore, you have to provide that age gap of 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever's appropriate, because otherwise you're going to have this kind of thing of 17-year-olds having sex with 18, 19-year-olds and being on the registry, even though it was all consensual. And law enforcement resources, which are supposedly in such short supply and they're overworked, can bring these charges. And prosecutorial resources are supposedly in such short supply because of the daunting caseloads, they find time to prosecute these cases. How does that work out, Andy?
Not so well.
How do they find, if they're so short supplied and overworked, how do they manage to bring these cases? I tell people I'm not brilliant at all. I probably struggle a lot. But if you look at the fact that the cops can bring such silly cases, when they talk about how short-staffed they are, you look at the type of cases they bring in your jurisdiction and you say, are you really? Are you really that short-staffed? Because if you can put all the investigative hours into bringing these cases, when the DA says, I need additional prosecutors, say, do you really?
Maybe we should get more, we should get public defenders to help balance that out and give you a run for your money on the cases that you're bringing.
Well, but then all you do then is I mean, I'm for getting more public defense resources because, but all you do then is you don't address the broken system. The system is broken because there's too much being put into it, too many charges, too many cases being brought. There's not enough people like Philadelphia where they're trying to not bring cases. They're trying to bring cases. So I don't see how that would suppress the number of cases. I want to suppress the number of people who are brought into the system. And just because we can doesn't mean we should. And since the discretion seems to not be able to be used, I need to take some of the discretion away to bring charges.
Did you happen to hear the news when Bernie Sanders said that even the Boston Marathon bomber should be able to be allowed to vote?
I did hear that, and I don't think he's going to enjoy a lot of widespread support on that stance. I don't think the public is with him on that.
The article that I'm referencing here is called "The Good Men Project: What Giving Felons the Right to Vote Says About Us," and that's totally how the article leads off. Is talking about Bernie Sanders saying that we have to give everybody the right to vote, including the Boston Marathon bomber. And I got it. Like, go read the article because he lays out a really good case for why we should let effectively everybody vote, because as Bernie Sanders said, as soon as you carve out one exception, well, where do you draw the line in carving out the next exception and the next one after that and the next one after that? And before you know it, now you've got poll taxes, or you've got more voter suppression. You've got all these other things that start kicking in. Just let everybody vote and make it easier to vote for all of the people. Even on the heels of the Florida constitutional amendment, there's efforts in place there to do things to further suppress the vote.
Well, on this thing, I know that I generally philosophically believe that people should be allowed to vote, certainly after they've paid their debt to society. But I just don't think that we have evolved to that point where we're ready to open up the prisons and set up polls in the prisons or absentee ballots for. I just don't see that wide public support for that. I think that if it's a matter of a constitutional right that you can assert that you have the right to vote, and you can win that constitutionally. But as far as if you have to go through a legislative process, I don't see that passing in very many states to have people vote while they're in prison.
And it does feel, again, trying to use like the 14th Amendment, where you do have some states where the two states are that you can vote while you are incarcerated versus states where you have lifetime banishment from voting. Doesn't that make it not equal from that regard? Or is it literally solely dependent that the states are in control of it and there's not a federal claim there at all that could be asserted?
Well, you raise a point that I don't think I have an answer for. The states generally decide how to run their elections, but like when the constitutional amendment, whichever number was, that gave the 18-year-old right to and universal women's suffrage, whether or not the feds could give that power to vote, I think they certainly could in federal elections. But do you see the conservative mood of our national government wanting to even assuming they had the power, which they might in federal elections, do you see us wanting to bestow that right on everybody? Can you sense that the U.S. Congress and the federal executive leadership is ready to do that?
No, I can't see that happening. Not at all.
Yeah, I mean, Sanders is going to be vilified for this. I mean, if he gains any traction in the primaries, if he emerges as any type of front runner, I think there's 21 or 22 candidates in there now, but if he emerges as any type of front runner, they're going to vilify him with all. They're going to cast this as the most loony thing they've ever heard, and he's going to be vilified for wanting to. They'll run commercials of him showing voting machines in prisons. And
Right.
they'll make. I mean, the creative marketers will come up with something to vilify him about that. And if he were to be the nominee, they're going to have a fun because all the Democrats are very far out there in terms of their ideology. We don't see anything that resembles a moderate Democrat much anymore, and so the party's being pushed further and further to the left, and they're outmaneuvering each other to be more extreme. And we don't see Sam Nunn, Senator Henry Jackson from Washington. We don't see those anymore in the Democratic Party.
You don't consider Sleepy Joe or Creepy Joe, whatever they call him, to be moderate?
Well, by the emerging standards of today, possibly. But if you look at his Senate record, he was by no means a moderate by what we would consider moderate. His ratings were quite liberal when he served in the Senate. But like I say, the party has taken an abrupt swing towards the left now. They're talking about things that America's not ready to swallow. They're talking about free college, universal Medicaid, Medicare for all. I mean, we've been vilifying universal health care since the Affordable Care Act was passed 10 years ago. And I'm for. I think that our healthcare system needs to figure out a way to provide basic healthcare to everyone. So I'm for a universal healthcare system, but that doesn't seem to be where the people are now. They do like apartment, and we're getting way off sex offender stuff, but they do like components of the Affordable Care Act of the keeping their kids on their policy that they're 21 and the pre-existing condition, the expansion of the Medicaid population to include target groups that weren't previously eligible. They like certain parts of it, but I just don't see this extremism, what I consider to be very extreme views of the Democratic Party, being what's going to carry an election in 2020. I think that it's we're going to see an outcome that's not going to be pretty if the party remains in the posture it's in right now.
Well, let's move on to a New York Times article talking about, the title is "No One Feels Safe Here: Life in Alabama's Prisons." This looks horrifying. That if I remember reading right, that there is a particular component of the prison that they've actually moved it behind like a barricaded wall so that the officers have a level of protection. And this looks horrifying as far as not a safe place to be. There was a particular quote that I wanted to that I'm remembering now, and I think they interviewed somebody that had a really, really long sentence, and he says, "Well, yeah, of course, we're in here to keep the public safe from us, but it's also your duty to keep us safe from each other." And that is clearly not what is happening at this particular place.
I agree with that liberal mumbo jumbo that when we incarcerate a person, you can argue about whether it should be rehabilitative or whether it should be punishment. That I'm okay with you having that discussion. But you have an absolute obligation to keep that individual safe, because you're taking all the ability for them to protect themselves away from them. You're taking all the ability for them to feed themselves away from them. You're taking their ability to clothe and medically care for themselves away from them. And if you don't like the expense of keeping people safe and feeding them and housing them safely, then maybe you ought to consider how many people you lock away. But you have an obligation. We as society have an obligation to make these institutions safe. And that costs money. And Alabama doesn't like to spend any money on their prisons. So southern states really try to keep their cost of running prisons low, and they rely on a lot of inmate supervision of other inmates, which is not in conformity with American Correctional Association standards, and it's not a safe way to operate a prison system. And I haven't read the 60-page report, but
but there are a couple pictures. There's one picture with a bunch of little baggies. I don't know if they're illicit drugs, if it's just tobacco. I don't know the answer to that. And then there's another picture with some nice homemade shanks that people have. So that's super duper good times when you got to walk around and you have to be have some sort of weapons with you while you travel around the campus to go to chow or go to the medical place or something. Really, this is. I mean, I get this. This again says what we are as a society when we've decided that these people are basically throwaway. But I still would then say, Larry, if they have decided to take away all of the money, if they've decided to say "F you," that hey, you did your crime, you deserve the time. Don't put them into some sort of enclosed like war zone. Just nuke them. I mean, if you're going to be that, don't make it cruel. Let it just be done.
I'm not sure we can do that.
So, I mean, but I'm just pushing it to the extreme to be like, look, this is what you're at. Like, otherwise, they say in the article that the first people that get messed with are like the young white people. So, okay, so in this equal justice system, somebody gets convicted of some crime and they get sent into this, and they were some kind of like a non-violent, just going to work, doing their thing, but they end up in this war zone. And it is an entirely inverted society than what you would expect. And you are not equipped to deal with this, where people are trying to scam you, people are trying to be violent with you, people are trying to take your clothes or your money or your store goods, all that stuff. And there's nothing you can do to protect yourself, and your hands are tied in all of that.
So, well, I was thumbing through the report, and overcrowding is always a major contributor to prison problems in prison. Because systems break down when you reach your design capacity. When you exceed, all systems break down in a prison. People don't understand that. And when I say that, every single thing in a prison breaks down when you have gross overcrowding. Medical care breaks down to the extent they have any. Food service breaks down. Laundry service breaks down. Supervision, the ability to supervise breaks down. Education, everything that you try to do in a prison to keep it running breaks down. And it says that one factor leading to the overwhelming violence is severe overcrowding. Alabama has one of the most overcrowded prison systems in the nation. In 2013, Alabama had a prison rate of 646 per 100,000 residents, the fourth highest in the nation. And according to their design capacity, they house, as of the time this report was written, 16,327 prisoners, and a system designed to house 9,882. So you're talking
about that's almost double, almost.
Yeah, and so that leads to a complete breakdown of. And I can assure you, these facilities are not brand new, because Alabama hasn't been putting a lot into correctional facilities. So I can assure you that these are old. They're probably not direct supervision. A lot of them are probably not direct supervision. They're probably old linear supervision where there's not line of sight into the housing units, which lends itself to a whole lot more problems. So Alabama's going to have to impose some taxes on themselves.
No.
Either that, or they're going to have to decide to let some people go, and they'll be forced to do it by those big old liberal, lifetime appointed federal judges that are disconnected from the voters because they have lifetime tenure once they're confirmed by the Senate, and it's going to require probably a decree of the federal court to say that you can't house any more than 9,882 or some arbitrary number. And then they'll blame the judges for releasing people. And the judges aren't telling them to release anybody. They're just telling them you can't house. It's always funny when they do. They're just telling, like Texas and California, you don't have to release a soul. All we're doing is telling you that you can't exceed this number for these facilities. You can start building facilities day and night if you want to. And funding the operation, but they'll blame the federal judges for saying that they have to release people. And then, but this is sad that in 2019 that we've got a state in our country. Thankfully, my state is actually doing a whole lot better job running their prisons compared to Alabama. But we have such a severe situation going on in that state, and probably in Mississippi, and probably in Louisiana as well. I mean, that's just the nature of life in those states.
And I mean, this goes along with the same thing when we see these constitutional challenges to the registry. They're not telling you what a constitutional registry would be. They're just telling you that this one isn't. And I just say that in parallel to this. They're not saying you have to let these people go. They're just saying you can't put more than X number of people here. How you get to that number, by building more or letting people go, it's entirely up to you.
Well, and that now they will tell them like basic standards on medical care. They will impose standards on square footage per inmate. Temperature is becoming an argument in some of the challenges to prison conditions. That the adverse. We talked about that through the history of our podcast. We've talked about how bad it is for Texas prisoners and Florida prisoners where they don't believe in ventilating. They can say that you have to keep the temperature to no higher than 82 degrees. And, well, that's up to you to figure out how to do it. You can shut the damn thing down, or you can spend a bunch of money air conditioning it. But the court can set standards for what constitutes within the cruel, not violating the cruel and inhumane conditions of our Constitution. But Alabama has had plenty of time to deal with this.
Yeah, certainly.
They've known for a long time that they're doing what they're doing, and it's you look at the staffing levels. They're having, with their low pay, they have extreme staff shortages, and nobody would want to work there, I'm sure. Nope. So the turnover is probably horrendous.
And it's also due pay, and so you end up scraping the bottom of the barrel on both sides of people. Like, I am not going into that war zone for $10 an hour. I'm just not doing it.
Oh, well, some of the people in Alabama call in, write in, email, tell us where we're wrong.
Moving on to an article.
This report is very scathing of the state of Alabama.
It is.
Ready to be a part of Registry Matters? Get links at registrymatters.co. If you need to be all discreet about it, contact them by email, registrymatterscast@gmail.com. You can call or text a ransom message to 747-227-4477. Want to support Registry Matters on a monthly basis? Head to patreon.com/Registry Matters. Not ready to become a patron? Give a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Or tell your buddies at your treatment class about the podcast. We want to send out a big heartfelt support for those on the registry. Keep fighting. Without you, we can't succeed. You make it possible.
And then, so this article comes from WKYT. Kentucky teen pleads guilty to killing a registrant. This fine young 17-year-old named Lance has decided that he wanted to to set somebody's house on fire in an attempt to kill. I guess he did kill the resident. So that's a good time. So thank you, Registry, for putting a person in jail for murder, and then we have one less life on the planet.
Well, if we only knew the extent of how many people have been harmed physically, including deaths. There are deaths we know about because the person has proclaimed that they did it because of the registry. There are deaths of registrants that we can't say for sure because the person didn't make the proclamation, and that's the only way the law enforcement will ever say there's a connection if the person proclaims that they did it because they're on the registry. But there have been so many acts of violence documented against people who are in the civil regulatory scheme. And for some reason, I remember the couple in, I believe it was South Carolina, both the husband and the wife were killed.
Yes.
So it was South Carolina because at NARSA, we issued a scathing condemnation of Governor Haley, Nikki Haley. And then she proceeded to get promoted by the president to ambassador to the, I believe it was UN ambassador, but now she's gone. But you would think in a compassionate society like we profess to be, you would think that people getting killed because of the bullseye that we've put on them would cause such a shakeup in a state capital that there would be a demand for something to be done. But not when it's a registered sex offender. It doesn't seem to barely create a ripple.
No one cares. I mean, the length of this article even speaks to all of that. The length of the article is, I don't know, 200 words maybe?
2 paragraphs.
Yeah. It's very short, just basically says this person did this person was this person died. And just bring it up because likely, and the person could have found it through other means, but likely because of the registry, the person found it and decided to take law into his own hands and be Judge Dredd. The person was out of prison, either on probation. He was on probation, pleading guilty in 2013. So he'd been out for 6 years. We could probably assume that he hadn't committed any other crimes or had done any other kinds of violations because he'd been out for 6 years and wasn't dead or locked up at the time. I guess this happened in 2017, so he'd been out for 3 or 4 years at the time.
So, well, he got what he had coming to him.
Right, and Will just said in chat, he said, society probably applauds the one who kills a registered rapist or child molester. And I'm telling you, if you go look at this article, you will find comment after comment after comment after comment that says, what was wrong? What bad deed was done here? Why is this person going to prison? Sounds like a good guy to me. All that.
Well, we had an incident here where I don't remember if it was either NARSL or the state group where we had an act of vigilantism where person was outside a teen girl's window and they was caught, and the father and the brother chased him down and beat him almost to the point of death, and they prosecuted the father and he got probation. But the support in the community was for the father. I mean, he had every justification to chase a person down that was peering in his daughter's window and to beat him senseless.
Seems like there may be other ways to handle that.
Well, yeah, if we succumb to that and decide that you can decide to administer your own form of justice and that you're the judge, jury, and executioner, we don't have a society, because everybody would they would be missing arms and teeth and eyes and I mean it would not be a society that would be pretty. And although the people applauded that is so dangerous. I mean, they should have said, no, sir, you can't do that. We can't justify you. Well, then we had another one. This was even before that. This one, the listeners can Google Elton John Richard.
Not the Elton John, but somebody else?
No, this was a guy who was, he chased down someone who was breaking in his car. He came out, tried to hold him at gunpoint. The guy ran. And he ran for quite some distance, and he crossed a major arterial called Paseo del Norte, and he was on the other side of Paseo, and then he was trying to scale a fence, and Elton John Richard shot him off of the top of the fence and killed him. Now, he argued self-defense. Now, he pursued him for, I think, the better part of between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. Yeah, so he was not defending. He was not in any danger at the point he was pursuing him. When he shot him off the top of the fence, he wasn't in any danger. He pled guilty. The prosecutor reduced it because he was such a hero in the community for chasing a person down and shooting them dead. The prosecutor pled it down to manslaughter, and he had a chance to get him probation. But he told just recently deceased Judge Murdoch, when he was standing before, after he had entered the plea to manslaughter, he told the judge that he didn't do anything wrong. He said that man was busted in my car, and Murdoch gave him a prison sentence of 2 or 3 years, a very short prison sentence. And then the community got so up in arms that Murdoch had to backpedal and reconsider, and he commuted the prison sentence and put him straight on probation. Now, can you imagine that? Chasing someone better part of a half a mile, shooting them off the top of a fence, and being given probation, and you stand there defiantly and tell the judge at sentencing you express no remorse whatsoever. And he could at least faked it and said, oh, wait, I'm really sorry, Judge. I probably went a little too far. I mean, but he was just as arrogant as could be that I didn't do anything wrong. And Murdoch, being the fair guy he was, he had a splendid reputation for being a judge. Murdoch was sitting there saying, what the hell's wrong with this guy? He doesn't give me anything to hang my hat on to give him probation. And then he gives him, like I say, a short prison sentence, and then all hell breaks loose in the community. So,
Right.
Vigilantism seems to be alive and well in this country.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, totally it is. The next article comes from SF Gate. I'm assuming that's going to be San Francisco Gate. Oh, I mean, I guess there's San Francisco weather there at the top. Amazon's facial recognition technology is supercharging local police. We talk a lot about containing, putting things in place to contain law enforcement and prosecutors from just using every tool. I don't want to say that they shouldn't have tools available to them, but this one is decidedly nefarious in that you're asking computers to recognize faces, and only based this is where the things are going to break down and people are going to have a bad time with it. They are trained based on they learn based on training where you feed it certain kinds of pictures. And there were maybe it was a year ago, there were reports that came out where, it was detecting all the white people very accurately, but when they threw in black people, things went off the rails, and there were very offensive images that came back where animals came back because they weren't trained on those people. If you then
Well, I have to
train these
confess.
systems, yeah, go ahead.
I have to confess, I somehow looked over this article, so I'm not going
Oh,
to be able to participate much in it.
okay. Well, it's right up my alley because I do some work with machine learning things, and
Well, yeah. So this one's going to be Yorn.
yeah, and but if you then take only convicted people's or mugshots, which are only the people that have engagement with law enforcement, and you train it on those, then the system is then sort of kind of forced to report back people that match it, even though the people may not match. So now you've got police going on wild goose chases, trying to track down people that may not even exist, but they resemble, the person that they have on some sort of camera footage or something like that. And it creates a terrible, terrible precedent that we would let computers determine who we're going to actually like target our investigative apparatus at. And it scares me to no end that this would be coming down the pike, and it's cheap. It says that they charged like $7 a month to feed it the data and use the computer processing power coming out of Amazon. It's frightening.
Well, I thought the computers were our answer, Andy. They could do everything for us.
They totally can do everything for us, but that doesn't mean they do it better.
Oh.
And the expression that we have had running around for whatever 20 years, garbage in, garbage out, 30 years. I mean, that is totally what this is. If you feed it garbage data, if it's biased in any way, if it's not if it's not natural, honest data, then the computer just gives you back what you gave it.
Well, there was a comment here from Washington County Public Defender's Office. So it doesn't look like the PD's in favor of it.
In this particular one in Oregon, where the majority of the article comes from, they are like a guy on staff there has written it. It took them 3 weeks to write the software. They started feeding and stuff, and they just started going to town and trying to match people across. It's the exact same thing where if we put a GPS on somebody's car without permission, that violates your Fourth Amendment, that, hey, no, you're going to have to go put boots on the ground and follow that person. You can't just use all the technology to follow people around.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're admitting there's some limitations on the ability of technology to solve all of our problems.
I'm going to push back. Like I think you're being a little silly. I think technology will solve the vast majorities. I just don't think we should use it for this. I think you could use it, in certain kinds of cases. I think that you would be able to turn this thing on, but I don't think you should do it just indiscriminately across. Hey, we have all these crime sprees running around. Let's just go run it on everybody walking everywhere at all times and try and match them. You have a huge Fourth Amendment problem there with you should be allowed to move freely. I guess even a First Amendment that you're being watched, and you shouldn't be tracked like that by the government at all.
You have no right to privacy in public, though.
But do you have the right to not be surveilled in public too by the government?
Nope, you sure don't. You have no right to privacy whatsoever in public. So every retailer, every law enforcement agency, everybody can surveil everybody in public.
But the like if you walk into the store and that's the store's property of the surveillance, then I'm sure they would willingly give it over to law enforcement, but law enforcement doesn't necessarily have access to it all on the spot.
Right.
And so it would just be you walking down the street or driving down the street and so forth. And then how long do they keep those records? That's another conversation that comes up all the time.
So they're getting very inexpensive to keep for a very long time.
Especially with cloud storage, you can buy storage just for gajillions of years, and you can store all the data, all of the places, all the time.
Well, I saw some statistic that I can't begin to recite, but something like the data we've created in the last 3 years with equals all that had been created in the history of data accumulation up to then. And I may have the 3 years off; it may be the last 5 or 7 years, but in the recent few years in the last decade, what we've created is just so astronomical compared to what had been created up to that point.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of video uploaded to YouTube every minute, which is astonishing.
Well, I tell people just a little puny Darcel, with cloud storage being so cheap, we're storing and scanning everything.
Yes.
and we're just a tiny blip comparatively. But we're keeping everything. So if little tiny Narcel can do it, can you imagine what Walmart can do.
Absolutely. Moving on to an article from Nashville Public Radio. After a year after state audit, lawmakers question whether a Middle Tennessee prison has improved. This sounds very similar to the article we just covered from the New York Times about a prison in Alabama. This one specifically pokes at Core Civic, which is the successor to CCA, and just more of the same sort of thing where they're not giving inmates access to medical. They're not necessarily letting them have yard call. And the situation is it's just bad for people that end up over there. These aren't necessarily the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst. These are people that just maybe they bounced too many checks that became a crime. Maybe they had some small amounts of drugs, and we put them in these places that are really, really violent places.
Well, I know I pick on private prisons from time to time, and I continue to believe that that's something we probably should not have privatized. My state went crazy. I think we still have the highest percentage of our overall system under private management.
Okay.
I think we're in the 40s in terms of percent of our total prison bed space. And I just do not believe that. I don't believe that the government does everything perfect, but I certainly do not believe a profit motive is appropriate in what we're doing with prisons. I'm not sure that I can ever be sold on that, but
I agree with you. I had a I don't remember when it was, but going to the idea of what incentivizes people. If raw capitalism, people they'll dump waste places, and just based on a pure profit motive. Well, if the motive and the product of a private prison is warehousing people, then they're going to do everything in their power to reduce their expenses, and their second largest expense would be inmates after their HR department handling their employee packages. So then they're going to cut down on food. They're going to, everything's going to go to shit. And these are human beings that we're dealing with. And yes, we don't like these people because they've done something wrong, but that doesn't mean we should treat them like garbage.
Well, there'll be somebody who'll write or call in and say that you could figure out a way to measure performance different than what we do. I mean, you could possibly invent a system that would reward the private prison operators for success, like we do with charter schools. We've looked at trying to figure out how to move people from public schools that are not performing into environments where they can do better. And if we could devise an incentive system that would incentivize these private prisons to turn out a better product than what they take in, but right now there's no such incentive structure that I'm aware of. And it seems like the incentive is just the opposite, to turn a profit for Core Civic shareholders, and it seems like they cut more corners than even the states do, which in the case of Alabama would be very tough. But
I don't know how we dig our way out of this hole, Larry.
Well, we're going to have to learn that things that we want in society cost money. We're going to have to start imposing taxes on ourselves. I think I sent you an article this last week, a few days ago, that showed how the amount of GDP, which stands for gross domestic product, on the federal level continues to decline. We talk about how we're overtaxed, but the share of the economy going to federal taxes has dropped from 19-20% down to 18-17. Now this year it's expected to drop down to 16%. Now, of course, now the deficit is widening because of that, because the expenditure side is not dropping. The expenditure side is remaining at that 19-20% of GDP. So the gap is widening. We're going to have to decide if we want to do all these things, including locking up large numbers of people. We may have to impose a little tax on ourselves.
If we can take a teeny little detour since we are on this subject, then I've heard recently about all like the different tax preparation software packages lobby to make it so that there's no easy way to file your taxes. However, there is something in the law that says if you make less than something of $70,000, there is a way for you to free file, but they can't market for it. They can't really announce it or anything like that. I just happened to hear about it because someone was covering the subject. But where I want to go with this is the Grover Norquist, they want taxes to be painful so that you will resist paying them, so that we will force ourselves to keep taxation as low as possible, because if it were just some like the index card idea where, hey, this is how much you made, sign here if everything's okay, and you send it back and tax day just was never even a thing, then that whole argument for like they could just tax us into oblivion because no one really care and no one pay any attention to it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely follow that. I mean, Grover's not somebody I hold in high esteem and admiration. I mean, I think it's silly to take a no tax increase pledge. Circumstances of life change. The economy changes. The needs of the nation, the needs of the state change, and the demographics of states are different. And you may have different needs in one state over the other. So taxation may need to be justifiably higher. And at the national level, we have an aging population. The big old boom of baby boomers are hitting the part of where they're going to be drawing down a lot of benefits, and those benefits have not been adequately provided for. We may have to impose some additional taxation on ourselves to pay for these benefits. And so to me, Grover Norquist is not someone I hold in very high esteem, because to simply say that we will never increase taxes, I harp all the time about our roads in New Mexico. We've got one of the lowest gasoline fuel taxes in the nation. It has not been increased since 1993. And very few people can tell me that inflation has not eroded the purchasing power of those dollars that we collect that have been inflation eroded for over 25 years. And it's a per gallon assessment.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and then the cars are that much more fuel efficient now, so you have like a double-edged sword.
You got the double whammy of the improving fuel efficiency, which is keeping your consumption at a flat line, and you've got the constant erosion of inflation of the dollars. It's silly to say that we can continue to maintain a high-quality, first-rate infrastructure if we don't impose any revenue streams that will generate the revenue to support that. And we talked about putting 10 cents a gallon gasoline tax would still kept us in the lowest of the nation, and all hell broke loose about how it would all end as all life as we know it. It'd be such a disproportionate thing on the poor. Well, I tell people now, you just look at your gas receipts if you've saved any from December of 2018, and you look at your gasoline receipts in May. April and May of 2019, and you'll see you're paying approximately $1 a gallon more now than you were 4 months ago. And I don't see an evaporation number of cars on the street. All life as we know it hasn't ended, but all of those dollars, that's 10 times what we were talking about putting on the gasoline tax. 10 times as much gasoline's gone up in 4 months. It hasn't ended all life as we know it. All that money has gone to big oil, to the Middle Eastern producers. And we don't mind giving the money to big oil. We don't mind Mobil. We don't mind Exxon. We don't mind all these companies. And we don't mind the sheikdoms of getting. But for some reason or another, we don't want to spend a dime on having safe bridges and smooth streets. And I'm pontificating because I don't understand that about us as a people. Why are we so reluctant to invest in ourselves? We want to be competitive economically. Well, you can't be competitive if your infrastructure is falling apart.
Yeah, we can't move commerce around if the truck can't get down the road.
Yes, and the oil patch down in southeastern New Mexico where there's an oil boom, they're saying that very thing. They're saying, for goodness sakes, we need infrastructure improvement down here.
Yeah. Yeah, and those trucks, like, the weight and the frequency of them would destroy a poorly constructed road.
So, but yes, the dollar increase since December, as far as I know, there hasn't been a market decline in the number of vehicles driving, and certainly as I can't tell that all life as we know it has ended, but that dime was going to end all life as we know it.
There's a senator in Florida named Perry Thurston, and I just love what he said in this next article. He says, lawmakers find themselves in the position of having to implement a constitutional change initiated by citizens because we're an ass-backward state, adding that Florida is one of only 3 states that does not automatically restore voting rights to felons who are no longer incarcerated or have completed probation. Republicans don't want to make it easier for felons to get their voting rights back, Thurston said, adding this is the last thing that they want to do. This article comes from law.com, and I guess it's I don't know how they have a whole bunch of properties, law.com, and this is the Daily Business Review. Felons' voting rights cause divides in closing days of their legislative process there in Florida.
Well, I keep saying that I think that the people who oppose that I think that they're being misguided. I tend to see a lot more conservatism. I think that they would actually pick up votes by restoring felons. I don't think that it's going to be the panacea for the Democratic Party that the conservatives fear. I think it's going to be just the opposite. I think it's going to be a panacea for the Republicans. So,
Right.
but it says Attorney General Ashley Moody, a Republican, opposed the constitutional amendment to begin with. So,
I don't get the idea of preventing people from voting, Larry. I just don't get it. I mean, unless you're really that kind of person that says, well, we don't want the people from the other side of the tracks voting because that'll mess up what we have. I mean, if that's what the mentality, that's a shitty attitude. That's a shitty attitude.
So, well, but in their mind, it makes sense that when you look at it from their perspective. All right, we're paying all the taxes, Andy. People who are on benefits, they don't pay any taxes. So we're paying the property taxes. We're paying the income taxes. We're paying, and these people are going in. It's easy to vote to impose taxes when you don't pay any. So therefore, it's kind of a resentment of that they get an equal say in the taxation policies and the expenditure policies of society, and yet they don't pay any. I mean, to them, it makes perfect sense.
Of course it does. And that's why there are logical fallacies and cognitive biases, and that would be motivated reasoning. You're working your way backwards to. Yeah.
Well, I remember being an Atlanta native that they had an old dilapidated Atlanta Public Library back in the 70s. And they voted what was considered a large bond referendum to build a brand new modern library. And the city of Atlanta was majority black at that time. But most of the revenue came from the affluent northern part of Atlanta, which is still the way Atlanta is today. If you live in the city of Atlanta, you got any money, you're going to be in the north part of Atlanta, and that hasn't changed. Yeah. And an elected leader, and I'm not going to say which one it was because I truly don't remember, but he was African American. He was African American, and he said, "Thanks to the voters of Atlanta, we're going to have a new library." And a white official, he said, "And thanks to our taxes, it's going to be paid for you." But I'm saying from their perspective, having people vote that are not net contributors. And in fact, Neil Bortz used to say that on his talk show. He said that he believed if you weren't a net taxpayer, that if you were a net tax consumer, you should not vote. Neil Bortz said that for years. So in their mind, it makes sense.
Gotcha. I'm totally going to have to let you drive the bus because during the pre-show, you started explaining this to me and my eyes started to roll in the back of my head. But this is the Legal Intelligencer, another propertyoflaw.com. Spanier conviction tossed by federal court over Jerry Sandusky's child molestation. Go with it, Larry.
Well, I tell you, I didn't give it the proper prep I should have done because I couldn't log in and pull the opinion because I had not gotten the credentials from our executive side of the team here. So I didn't see the 42-page opinion until in the final hour of prep. But I was able to do a quick read of it, and it's just a fascinating read for you legal junkies out there. Hank, you're one of them. You'll love it. But for legal junkies out there, this is a fascinating read because for those who don't remember the name Graham Spanier, he's associated with Jerry Sandusky. And he was the president of the university, and he got canned in all that controversy back with Sandusky, and he got convicted of a misdemeanor offense. And the issue is pretty straightforward. They convicted him of a misdemeanor that was an ex post facto offense. But what makes it fascinating is how he got to this end. He takes his case to trial rather than pleading, and he gets convicted by a jury. He goes through all the appeals within the state of Pennsylvania before he can even begin to think about going into federal court on his state conviction. And he jumps through all the hoops to get to federal court by exhaustion. There's a requirement under the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act that we can thank the conservatives for in 1995 for passing and putting on the president's desk. The hoops are, it's like threading a needle to get to challenge a state court conviction. So he jumps through all the hoops and he gets nowhere. in state court, and then he files this federal habeas petition, and it went exceedingly fast for him from the time he filed it until the time the decision made. It was less than 2 months, which I if I'm reading this right, I'm just shocked at how it could move so fast. But he prevails because the state changed the law in 2007, and his conduct that he was convicted of, the child endangerment the statute, the version that would have been in effect for his conduct occurred in 2001, and the state's continued to say that there's no problem here. And the federal magistrate judge says, well, sure, there's a problem. There's several problems here. Number one, the ex post facto clause. So he manages to get his conviction overturned. And of course, the state has already announced that they're going to appeal, and their first appeal is to the district judge. This is just a magistrate judge, which is one level below the federal district judge, who is appointed by the president and has a Article 3 protection. This magistrate judge doesn't have Article 3 protection. They're appointed by the court, by the judges themselves. They apply, they get appointed to serve as a federal magistrate judge. But this is just a fascinating read that this man fought this thing, this misdemeanor conviction, and he's won in a venue where you have to thread the needle so narrowly, and he managed to thread the needle and get a magistrate judge to see his arguments, to how cogent and credible they are. Endangered the welfare of children is what he's convicted of.
All right, some big propeller head legal stuff there.
Well, it like I say, it's only for the legal junkies who really, the people who don't understand the nuances of the limitations on federal habeas. They'll have a reaction which is not the appropriate one. They'll say, well, there you go again. There's one justice system for people who have money and one who doesn't. And there's some truth in that. Spanier probably has more money, and he's been able to go through all the exhaustion requirements of every appeal he could do in the state of Pennsylvania. And he had the money to keep those appeals going, and then he had the money to go into federal court to file this habeas petition. So there's some truth in that. But it's a straightforward argument. The law that was in effect at the time he allegedly committed this crime, that's what he has to be held accountable to, not what they changed 6 years later.
Right, and I'm sure that many of our people, in our circle, they can attest to that it took 10 years before the charges came out, and you are charged based on what the crime was, what the sentencing and stuff was 10 years ago. So that is directly in line with what we would already expect.
So, well, on page 7, I highlighted it says, having challenged his conviction in Pennsylvania State Court, Spanier filed the instant habeas corpus petition on March 22nd, 2019. This was released, let's see, the date on this is April 30th. Now, when you talk about filing something on March 22nd, 2019, right, unless that's a typo and meant 2018, I don't see how in the world all the responses could be filed, because the state has a chance to respond. They usually say that they don't have enough time and they ask for an extension. And then the petitioner can reply in support of the original petition, and then the magistrate judge has to review it. And so, like I say, unless that's a typo, which it could be, I can't imagine something. But it says that the response was filed on April 19th, and then here we've got a decision just so quickly. I know it's corruption. That's what it is, Andy. That's
could be. Totally could be. So, also aliens.
I've never seen anything move this fast. So, but like I said, I highlighted a few things. Individuals seeking habeas relief on page 8, it talks about that you have to exhaust your remedies available in state court before you can seek in federal court. So I highlighted that for the legal junkies, and then the exhaustion requirement is really important, because if you don't do that, the federal habeas judge has to dismiss your complaint for failure to exhaust, and you have to go back into state court and try to exhaust your claims. And then I highlighted some more stuff on page 14, that explains more about federal habeas. But like I say, unless you're a legal junkie, this probably won't appeal to you. But if you do like reading the nuances of what you have to do in federal habeas, this would be a fascinating read for folks. because
And you're going to send
people
me
don't
what you've
understand.
highlighted?
I'm going to do that. And
Excellent.
I should probably highlight a little bit more later, but at least I'll get you something so when you distribute the podcast, people can see what I'm getting all palpitatious about. Is there any such word as palpitatious?
I will accept that as being a word. Let it be known from this point forward that palpitatious is now a word. Larry said so.
So, but yeah, I know Hank will love it. So,
And and Will is like salivating in the chat talking about different things going on with what you're saying. So yeah, Will is definitely excited about it as well.
oh wow.
I don't know what to do with this one. This one is an icky thing, but I don't understand why we would make this illegal. But there's a bill moving through the Florida Senate, and maybe this did. I don't know. I think this passed. I don't know if the governor will sign it. But if you have anything, if you have child-like dolls or in possession or sex dolls, anything like that, they are making it illegal for you to be in possession of these things. And I'm really conflicted on this.
I took a gander at that, and I don't think this will withstand constitutional scrutiny when the first challenge is filed. I really don't.
Okay.
I'm going to be very surprised if I mean, it's just too
It's
damn
yucky.
vague.
It's icky for sure, but I don't know how you could stop someone from having sex with a doll in the privacy of their own home. I don't see what crime you could create out of that.
Well, but on line 41, you look on the green underline, it says in a manner obscene. That's just way too vague.
Okay.
What the hell is obscene?
That's totally subjective to what you determine to be obscene.
So I think that the ACLU is probably going to attach themselves to this if the governor signs it. I think is this one of the ones that made it to the governor? I think it did, right?
I believe so, and Jen in chat says it passed both, waiting on governor to sign it. And she's not positive; she's just speculating that it is.
Yeah, I think this is something that's waiting on the governor, but like I said, I think this thing's going to have real problems.
It'll make it, and then it'll immediately be challenged.
Well, I don't know if immediately because nobody ever has any money, but I'm assuming that if this comes to the attention of the ACLU, and usually the ACLU, at least in my state, has lobbying presence in the Capitol, they probably already are aware of this, and in our state they would have encouraged it not pass. And but if this is signed by the governor, I would hope for a challenge, and I would anticipate a challenge because it's so horrible.
Right.
So it was.
Well, that's good times.
It was a substitute bill. If you look up the top there, if they use the same system we do, it says CS for SB 160. So that General Means Committee substitute for Senate Bill 160. So the question is, the original introduced copy, was it worse than this? And did they try to tone it down, or did this get like the International Megan's Law? Did it get worse as it went along? Having not living in Florida, not following it. I don't know if this thing got worse as it went through, or if they actually tried to tone the beast down before it went through. This is the substitute bill better than the original bill? That would be a listener for the person in chat. A question if they were following it: is it any better than what was originally introduced? Because again, I didn't do the research on that before going live. I didn't look at the original introduced copy.
So Will is channeling his inner Larry, and he goes, "Well, we can't have these sick perverts with child sex dolls living out their gross fantasies. That's just nasty." Do you think you could say it just like that, Larry?
Well, we can't have that.
Well, let's move on to our final article, as far as I know, unless you're going to throw something in there last second. This is our favorite governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam. It's hard to say. I won't sign another mandatory minimum sentence bill into law, and here's why. Details all of the challenges with all the mandatory minimums of taking away the discretion of the judges, and that they would have intimate details of what's going on with the individual in the case and what they deem. They are judges, right? They should be able to judge what kind of sentence would be most effective. And so he says he's not going to sign any more laws like that.
Well, and we will see if the people of Virginia appreciate that stance. He's a Democrat. We've got a similar situation down in Louisiana with John Bel Edwards. He's saying, I'm sick of all this stuff, and he's pushing back. And we'll see if this is political suicide, won't we?
We will, for sure. I do have a question for you. Do you know how many countries? I'm reading through this thing this morning at a coffee shop, and I came across something that just jumped out at me as it could just be a typo, but then I'm looking at it as being the Washington Post, and I would put a certain amount of credibility on what they say to be true. Do you know how many countries there are in the United States, Larry? I mean, not in the United States, Jesus. I just pulled 3 countries of Mexico. Do you know how many countries there are in the world?
I don't have that number at the tip of my head.
As far as I knew, and I verified it, there's 195. And South Sudan is the most recently added country when the war-torn country split apart. At the end of a paragraph towards the top, it says, that is the highest incarceration rate out of 222 countries ranked by the World Prison Brief. I'm having a really hard time squaring the math of 195 to 222. I don't know what that means.
Well, unless depending on how you define a country. The Vatican could be defined as a country, but I don't know. But whether it's 222 or whether it's 197, the U.S. is always at the top of the list.
We are by a long shot. So if you hear thunder, we have just decided to start having like the heavens have opened up and it's raining like massively in thunder and lightning. Well, but at the end of 2016, what?
If you were at our Hideaway Studios, you would not be having this problem.
This is correct. If I was in my Northeast incognito studio, this would not be a problem.
Well, I'm talking about the Hideaway one we use when I'm in Germany.
Oh, yes, that one where it's like it's a perfect sound
bunker.
studio.
Yes.
Right? But at the end of 2016, the United States had 655 people in prison for every 100,000 adults, compared to a world prison population of 145 per 100. That's like it's 5 times higher than the other nations. It's ridiculous how many people we have locked up.
Well, I did that presentation a few years ago at an ARSO conference in Dallas, and then I did the variations of the states, and I stood in conservative Texas, and I said, now y'all take good pride about how much smarter Southerners are than those damn liberal do-gooders. I said, now let's take a look at this chart here. And I showed the Southern states are just off the charts compared to even the high rates of the United States. But you have disparities like from the low incarceration rates. It's almost a 5-time differential over the high rate. And I said, so I don't know what the problem is. I said, either Southerners are inherently more criminal or these damn liberal do-gooders are doing it differently. And I can't explain it. And of course, neither could the people in Texas. But in this country, we have vastly different rates of incarceration among the states, vastly different.
Right. And I remember when you did that, something similar, you used FBI statistics there and in Georgia, and someone's head started spinning around like, you lie! Almost.
So, well, yeah, it's one of those things where the statistics, we have to agree that the statistics are valid. And some people, when they don't like the statistics, they claim, but I use the same statistics that we rely on for asking for crime fighting allocations. Those are the FBI statistics, the uniform crime statistics. So I just use what everybody cites to. I mean, I don't know what else to do, but yes, I do remember that you told me that person was consternated over the presentation that I did. But
I watched his expression. He was very, very upset with you making that claim.
Well, the reason why he was upset is because the crime rate has been going down for 25 years in most of this nation, while we've been ever increasing the amount of resources we've been devoting to law enforcement and to prisons and locking up more and more people. And of course, you could argue that the crime rate's gone down because we've locked up more people. You could make that argument. But I was just making the point that at some point, if the crime rate goes down, down, and down, and down, eventually you probably ought to start cutting back on the number of people you have allocating to fighting crime, because at some point, if you've got half the crime you had in 1995 and you've got the same number of people working, are they as busy as they were in 1995?
Right. Well, that's all I have, Larry. But you know what we're going to do now? We are going to thank our top patrons. Are you ready to do that?
Are we going to do it? We're going to be on here hours and hours and hours.
Why don't you go first?
Didn't we just hit our 1,000th patron this week?
Close to it. We are like in an eye shot range there. It's right on the horizon.
So we are deeply grateful to Thomas, Justin, Mike, Horace, and Dave.
And then also Gerald, Suzanne, Hank, Patty, and Michael. These are the top 10 patrons. I challenge all of you to try and beat them as being the top patrons. And thank you to all of our patrons, and also just thank you to all of our listeners. Our numbers are doing really well. I'm pleased with it. And so how can people reach out to us, Larry?
Very, very carefully, because if you don't do it carefully, you may get in trouble.
It's possible.
Yes, you could reach out to us by going to our website, our registrymatters.co. That's one way, right?
Yes, it is.
Or you could call, and I love phone calls. Just try to keep them short enough to where they can be played. But 747-227-4477. Or you can send us an email, which they get screened by our executive producer, and that's registrymatterscast@gmail.com. Registry Matters.
I forward almost every one of them to you too, by the way.
So, and then you can become, the best way to support us is to become a patron as little as $1 per month. I think that's as low as it goes, but
it is.
We're trying to reach that magic 100 threshold. I don't know what's magic about it. It just seems like a nice round number, though, doesn't it?
It does, for sure.
And if that wraps up this, I would tell anyone who listens to this podcast who happened to have been on the NARSL in action call, where I forgot to pick the winners. The winners were picked by the randomness of the computer draw with your contestant number, and I reached out to everybody who won, and we actually awarded a third prize, and I called everyone who won. And oddly enough, this is the first time ever of 3 people I called, all 3 people answered their phone.
What? Who answers phones?
I was shocked. And what made it odd is I had no idea who was calling, because the only information you were able to provide me was the phone number that they entered from when they texted their phone, from their phone. So
they
I'm calling
texted
people.
it, so yeah.
So I'm calling people. I'm going to answer. I say who I am, and I'm calling about the NARSL in action, but I have no idea if I've got the right person. And so I say, well, can I ask whom I'm speaking? Well, it's kind of awkward because you generally should know who you're calling when you call somebody.
Right.
So, but everyone has been awarded their prizes, and we apologize for the omission of me not announcing in the third hour that we were going to award them. That was my plan. We were going to pick 2 numbers in third hour, and I totally forgot.
Yep. That's how it goes, man. Sometimes that being 200 and whatever years old you are, that causes a challenge for you sometimes.
So, and the people who won, one of them was extremely grateful because he was having trouble funding his registration. So he said it's going to make it a lot easier for me as a graduate student to be able to get to the conference. I was going to come, but this is a great thing to hear.
Awesome. That's good news. Well, that's all I got, Larry.
And then we should promote the NARSL conference, don't you think? We're getting close to it. We're a month out. It's today's the 4th.
It's 4 weeks, right? It's 4 weeks from yesterday.
It's June 7th through 9th, and actually the meet and greet for the socialization is the evening of the 6th, but it's in Houston, and attendance is looking fantastic. The lineup is looking fantastic for the presentations, and got a lot of fun with the prize, whatever they call it, the raffle and the live auction and things that they're going to be doing, and it's a great opportunity. And if you want to find out more about what is it, narslconference.org? I never can keep these things straight. But
it's conference.narsl.org.
Conference.narsl.org. But yes, and the discounts are going to soon expire for the early bird and the hotel block special rate that we have that includes breakfast for 2, a breakfast bar, a hot breakfast with fruit, not just a continental breakfast, but a very nice hot breakfast that's included for $104. As of a couple of days ago, if you don't get in that block or that group rate in that block of people, the rack rate was $125 for those same nights, and that does not include the breakfast bar. So if you think you're going to come, you better book your room before the 15th. At the end of the 15th, the block expires.
Do you think we'll be able to get any of the NARSL people on to do a quick little 5-minute thing on the podcast to promote it?
Well, I'm sure we could if we asked. We could get the chair, maybe even the executive director. She might be lurking out there.
She might be. But we'll save that for maybe next week and the week after, and we'll get some people on to promote the conference.
Oh, well, I think I did a decent thumbnails promotion just now.
I think you did too.
But we'll do it again and again and again, because we want people to take advantage of this. We're not as heavily on legal this year as we have been in previous conferences. We're not doing as much legal, but there'll be plenty of legal. There'll be stuff there for everybody.
Gotcha. Well, cool, Larry. That's all I got. And with that, I bid you adieu, and I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. My security camera's going bonkers with all the lightning going off. It's pretty interesting.
Oh, well, all right. Good
Take
night.
care, man. Bye.
Thank you for joining us here at FYP, and we hope you will join us again on our next broadcast.